This show is strictly for educational purposes. The opinions expressed on the show are personal to the individuals appearing in the show and not those of Thinking Tree Ecoholics Private Limited. The show is not intended to offend or defame any individual, entity, caste, community, race, or religion, or to denigrate any institution, person, living or dead. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
Hello and welcome to Ecoholics Thinking Tree series. Today we have with us Monika Halan. She is a famous author of Let's Talk Money, a famous book on personal finance. She is a consulting editor for Mint, India's second largest business daily. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Sanat.
Today we'll discuss about how COVID is affecting our personal finances. So you know that till now we have been discussing the effects of this pandemic on the population at large from the government's point of view. Today we will have a look at it from the personal finance perspective. Because let's not forget that money is only an instrument. To begin with, ma'am, you have immense experience in the field of personal finance, and your insights often are very useful in managing one's finances. What measures, according to you, can be taken by the government to uplift the overall purchasing power of the middle class Indian?
The government really has a very difficult task right now
Yes,
because everybody needs the money. It's the businesses. It's a supply and a demand shock. So unless it's a person below the poverty line, I don't think the government has the fiscal space to give the kind of wage support that we've seen Germany, France, US do. Because
yes,
remember, we are a $2,000 per capita income country, and we are comparing ourselves with 40,000, 50,000, $70,000 per capita income countries. We
yes,
simply don't have the fiscal space to for the government to hand out money to the middle class. Now, 30% of our population is below poverty line. They're just, it's poor. So
yes,
the first right of anybody is it's there. They should get the right, and they indeed have through the different schemes, through free rations for 3 months, plus transfers into Jan Dhan accounts. All that the government has done is tried to stop starvation deaths in India. So our issues are very different now. Middle class Indians, typically, if they belong to the organized sector, the Indian saving rate, we are at about 17%. Household savings is about 17% of GDP.
okay,
In the US, households are leveraged; they are in deficit, right?
yes,
So they are over leveraged.
yes, yes,
An average organized sector Indian household has the wherewithal through savings to last a few months, right? So if we are simply looking at very scarce resources and the optimal use of that, I don't think a middle class household is going to be looking at the government in India at all,
yes, yes, yes,
right? So we are literally on our own, and that is because of the state of the development of the country, and you can't blame a particular government today for it because this is actually the story which has built up over the last 70 years. So this is where we are, $2,000 per capita income. We may be in the top five soon of GDP, but when it comes to 1.3 billion people, it spreads very thin. So we
yes,
really have to increase the pie. There is no other way. The pie will have to increase for everybody to get a little more.
yes, indeed. Ma'am, do you feel that India's spending habit have been used to our advantage while formulating the policies? Like we have more amount of saving habits in comparison to other advanced economies.
So, typically a country with no social security tends to have higher savings ratios.
Yes,
And you can look at the data across the world where the citizen feels that there is a good public medical system, public education, and a basic social security. The incentives are all towards not saving. And
yes,
an average Indian household, again, with either organized sector wages or entrepreneurs, anybody who is able to save saves because we know that even in an emergency, there's nobody to turn to.
yes,
And when you are going to far away into the future, you will have to spend on your children's education because higher education is so supply constrained that you have no option. Either your children are superheroes and they get 99, and then
yes,
they go into cheap government colleges, or the capitation fees are so high. So you're on your own in an emergency, you're on your own in education, you're on your own in your health and for your retirement. So you have no option but to save. So that's prudent behavior.
Yes,
So yes,
indeed, ma'am.
it's the stage and state of the country which drives our saving behavior. And remember, as India is getting out of poverty, and there's a section, there are 300 million people who are in the middle class, and
Yes.
we're seeing the savings ratios drop. It used to be over 23, 24 just a few years ago, and we're down to 17. So
Correct.
we're already beginning to see the shifts in the way that households behave as the country progresses towards losing the poverty stigma and moving to a middle income country.
Thinking from macroeconomic perspective, I've been reading your article where you were talking about the shift of RBI's stance from inflation to growth. That promises deep comfort in the fact that our central bank is trying ways like conventional, unconventional, to bring India back on track. The repo rate cut was aimed at injecting liquidity into the system. However, what is needed is to remove the risk averseness as there is substantial liquidity in the banking sector. Also, the extension of the moratorium would bring in some relief to the borrowers, but it can put under pressure on the bank's balance sheet. What are your thoughts on it?
So this is again one of those historical problems which, when there's a crisis, comes back to bite you very hard.
Yes.
The key problem, really, I mean, it's a several part problem. One is that uh, the the RBI has a dual role as the manager of public debt plus the regulator. So that's one conflict
Yes.
straight up. As the manager of public debt, its job is to get the government bonds sold in the market.
Yes.
Now, when it does that, it crowds out private sector investments because we run large deficits.
Yes.
And because of the way that RBI has been very, overly busy with its role as a public debt manager, and a variety of other reasons which are to do with conservatism, RBI being a very conservative central bank, which has been good in some parts, but terrible when you look at its role in preventing a robust, deep, and wide corporate bond market. So, see, India's problem, what is the problem that we have right now? We have a problem that unless you are AAA rated or AAA at the highest level of safety, there is no market for the bonds.
Yes.
Right. So the minute your either credit rating drops or it's a company which is not AAA rated, finds it very difficult to raise money in the corporate bond market. Even if it does, there is no secondary market at all. Or
Yes.
I mean, that's wrong. There is a market, but it is so thin that price discovery is very, very difficult. So it isn't as if countries abroad don't haven't had this problem. It isn't as if those solutions are not possible, but we need to get a deep and wide and liquid corporate bond market. And when you have price discovery through the market, when it's mark to market, then a lot of these issues go away. So yes, the stress is of banks actually parking their money with RBI at despite the nudge being to lend. But the banks are in a situation where, because of the historical reasons of very large NPAs and also the whole phone banking system, I mean, we've
Yes.
all been through those UPA 2 times where really the way that the loans were given out, it has been an open secret on how public sector banks especially have been used as an ATM to benefit certain people. So
Yes.
that NPA problem is there. There's been a witch hunt again to nail down the perpetrators. Bankers are afraid to lend because they don't want to end up in jail, and it's a real fear. So
Yes.
you have banks being ultra conservative because of the way that banking has happened in India for 60, 70 years. So they are risk averse. So either they'll give it to AAA or they'll not lend at all because questions can be raised. So you have money in the system, but it's not getting lent.
Yes.
So then the government comes out and says, okay, we'll guarantee. But these are only stopgap measures. We will have to find a way of taking the bad loans off the table. Maybe the time for a grand bargain is there to say, hua to hua, finished. Okay, let's start again.
Yes.
And then start and saying that, look, we will forget what has happened till now. But from now on, if we find one loan which is compromised, then you're in jail, right? So
Yeah.
we'll have to have some way to move forward. It's a stalemate.
Yes, yes,
It's
yes.
harming everybody. The people who need the money are not getting the money. The people who have the money get more money. So there is a problem.
Yes, that's a problem. How do you see the current situation? Like RBI is reducing the interest rate, and banks are also reducing the lending rates, but people are not demanding loans. How do you see the current perspective from the personal finance perspective? Why people are not demanding loans? That is quite evident from the crisis period. But how RBI will manage to actually recover the economy from the people's perspective?
I think RBI will have a limited role in economic recovery. The ball is squarely in the North Block with the
Mm.
Finance Ministry.
Financial.
And look, the fiscal space is very small,
Yes.
and the option of monetizing debt is there. But I think they've been prudent enough not to use it ahead. So the COVID problem is not over by a long shot. There is, I would imagine the problem will last a full 2 years, starting say March. We should be out of it in 2 years, right?
Yes.
And businesses take time to, which have shut down, to either reopen or restructure. So there is a long runway ahead. To
Yes.
use your entire firepower at the head of the problem would have meant leaving nothing later. So I don't think monetizing of the debt is off the table, which basically, what does that mean? It means that you just print currency to bridge
Yes.
the deficit. So the
Yes.
deficit is, it's already going to be, state plus center should be already in the range of 10%. And that's a large number for a country like India. But
Yes.
the option of inflating it away and the
Yes.
option of, I mean, again, monetizing, inflating it away will fall in the same bucket,
Yes.
exists. But I don't think we want to use it at the top of the problem, because remember, even if we want to give money to people to spend, till the lockdown is fully over, you're going to have very risk averse behavior because people have lost jobs, they are losing incomes. At
Mm.
such a time, you're not going to be wanting to borrow more. So, what does borrowing show really? I mean, why is it that our fathers never borrowed? My generation has borrowed very prudently in terms of, buying a home or one car. And the
Yeah.
millennials are very free with their borrowing. It reflects a certain confidence about the future, about
Yeah.
your ability to earn.
Yes. Yes.
My
Yes.
father's generation in the 80s had really, I mean, they grew up in socialism. They did not
Yes.
think that prosperity was possible. My
Yes.
generation, we've been in the middle, half there, half here, and we've sort of stepped out to say, okay, we can borrow because we can pay back. The millennials have been born, and they've grown up in a country where
Yes.
anything is possible. So look at their borrowing behavior. So borrowing tells you confidence about their future, of anybody's future. And today, that is one thing that we're all afraid of. Whose
Yes.
job will go, how long the salary cuts will last. So your prudent actually behavior is to pay off your debt. So
Yes.
people who have either student loans or home loans or vehicle loans, the first thing you do is you use up your savings to pay off your debt.
Seriously.
You don't start borrowing more because you don't know what the future is like.
What?
Behavior will come back. Look, it's not as
Yes.
if we're going back to the caves, we're not going back to horse carts. Economies will recover. It recovered after the Spanish flu, it'll recover now. Whether it'll take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and especially for the young people, you have a 30-year runway ahead of you. These are
Yes.
just important lessons that you all will learn. But yes, of course, we'll recover,
Yes.
and then the borrowing behavior will come back. But it's a good time to be really prudent, to
Mm.
understand that these things happen. And who has done well in this time? Firms who have built up cash revenues. I mean, look around. Which firm had cash revenues? How they have used it? The
Yes.
fault lines at a time like this, whether it's a firm or a household, will become very deep and will crack. So
Correct.
it's always a good idea to have at least 6 months of cash with you. 6 months, and I'm now saying for people over 50, at least 2 years of cash,
Yeah.
because that's the age where your job loss may not ever, you may never recover from that because you're too old and you're too expensive, all of that.
Yes. Yes. I'll
But
come to the debt. Yeah, I'll come to the debt question. There's a debate between good debt and bad debt. But
Hmm.
apart from this, other economists suggest that to pull India out of immense economic crisis put forth by COVID, even deficit financing is required as a last resort, as according to you as well. The government should go ahead with it. And how do you think that deficit financing erodes people of their purchasing power? Can people in some way be prepared for that?
So we already have deficit financing in the country. What is deficit financing? Government raises resources through tax revenue, direct, indirect. When it spends more than it collects, the
Yes.
shortfall is called deficit.
Yes.
There is a good deficit, just as we have a good loan and bad loan, there's a good deficit and a bad deficit. If the government is borrowing to spend on things like interest payments, current consumption, farm loan waivers, that's a bad debt. If the government is borrowing to build infrastructure, that's a good debt.
Good.
Similar to a car loan, home loan, holiday loan, that equation. So the FRBM Act has said that the target for a government is zero revenue deficit. That means that government should not borrow to spend on things like interest or current consumption. Essentially, it can borrow 3% of GDP for infrastructure development, right? So fiscal deficit number can be 3%. Your target is 3%.
Yes.
When revenue deficit is zero. But we are not there at all. So we are already at a higher fiscal deficit. I think fiscal deficit for the center was somewhere between 3.4, 3.5. But post-COVID, it is much higher. You include, every government does off-balance sheet things. You don't pay PSU people, so that's off-balance sheet. You do oil bonds, so all governments do off-balance sheet. So has this government. So when you add all of that up and you add the state, we are at 9 or 10% of GDP. So we are already deficit. We are deficit financing already. The question, I think, is, do we monetize this deficit?
Yes.
Do we print currency? We've chosen not to do that now. It's a good thing. I think we will do it in the future. And yes, inflation will happen. But do remember that RBI now, by law, is mandated to maintain inflation between 2 and 6. So you've got, RBI has a corridor which it's got to maintain inflation, with the target being at 4. Now we've been doggedly at 4, inflation going till 6. We still have a corridor of 200 basis points, and I don't think we're going to go significantly over that. And 6% inflation is we can deal with that. The problem begins like it did in 2009-10, when your inflation becomes 10-11%. Then that's a real problem, because prices go up so fast, it cuts your purchasing power. It's a tax on the poor. But in that corridor of 2 to 6 for a developing economy, I think we are fine. We're still okay. We're still around 4.5, I think. But there is room. There is a runway ahead for inflation.
Yes. Because from the perspective of personal finance, consider FD is no longer attractive, and FD is the safest option during COVID because we cannot invest in markets. So how do you see, what are the other options that people can invest?
So I have a problem with your statement that FD is the only option, and this is a good time to invest in FDs, and markets are not an option. I think markets are always an option. I don't think it's ever an either or. And the analogy that I always like to give is that when somebody asks you, what do you eat? You don't just say, I eat roti or I eat rice. You can't have a plate full of just rice.
Yes.
You have what is a balanced meal. You will have carbohydrates, protein, fats. So you will have roti, sabzi, meat, chutney, whatever. And it's a balanced meal. You have to look at investments in the same way, that there are products which give you growth, which is equity. There are products which give you safety, which is your PPF, your PF, your fixed deposit.
Yes.
Debt funds come in the middle of that, and there are return kickers. Your pickle and all of that is your small cap, your mid caps, which give you that taste kicker or a return kicker.
Yes.
Gold hedges against inflation. So at every point in time, unless you have a portfolio, you end up asking, what do I invest in now? So people are now getting into gold, but gold's bull run happened earlier in the year. So if you always look at last month's winner or last year's winner, you will always lose.
Yes.
So the strategy is to be in the market all the time. You don't constantly change your diet to suit a new fad. Similarly, you have an asset allocation according to your age and according to what your goals are. And according to that, your asset allocation is between equity and debt, and you stay with that. In
Yes.
fact, when markets fall so much, you actually ramp up equity.
Yes.
So you have to be in the market all the time. A good route for retail investors is through mutual funds, whether index funds or managed funds, depends on your sophistication. But direct stocks is a no-no because you don't know what to pick, how to monitor. But through funds, you can you can take structured risk
Yes.
without the problem of your money going down to zero, because every scheme will have 30 to 50 stocks. So
Yes.
that proportional risk reduces. So you have to be in the market all the time. You have to have all the products in the proportions that you need, and you do not jump from asset to asset.
Yes, indeed, that's a great point, ma'am, for the individuals because people are thinking in the only one direction, but that is a multi-dimensional investment
Correct.
portfolio. That's a great point. If we trace back with, we can say, in the history, and do you feel that India's policy making, the middle class has somewhat been neglected, as they are the ones who struggle the most in maintaining a household while balancing the taxes and paying debts? Can we somewhat compare them to the third estate from the French Revolution?
So I don't know if the middle class really is that, harassed. So in the middle class, so if you have 300 million people in the middle class, how many of them actually pay taxes?
Yes,
It's a fraction. It's a
fraction.
tiny fraction. So if you're talking of that small organized sector population who has to pay taxes because the company cuts it, that little tiny taxpayer, yes, I will agree to what you're saying. But the middle class is far larger, and it includes consultants, doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, people who work on their own, shopkeepers. They're all part of middle. We're not talking of just people, white collar workers in the government or an MNC or an Indian bank. We're not just talking about these. The middle class is 300 million people strong, and
Yes.
we don't pay our taxes. So I don't agree at all that it's pampered. It's harassed. I think it's pampered a lot. Um, you have a lot of tax breaks. You have a long-term equity capital gain, which is just 10%. I mean, where is it in the world that you have a 10% long-term capital gains tax? So I think the Indian middle class has to pay its taxes, not just the people who are forced to because of where they work,
Yes,
but
yes,
more people need to pay taxes so that the state can actually do the spending on health, infrastructure, education that it needs to. So this question goes again and again that the government is not doing enough. And I'm saying, well, you're not paying your taxes enough. Anybody who can get out of the GST does. Anybody who can take cash still does. So, I mean, we're a deeply corrupt country. And then these are the wages of a deeply corrupt country that the government is not going to have the money to spend where it needs to. So, what do you do?
I think it's not the people to blame, it's like the system. If the system becomes very efficient, the people will have to pay the taxes.
Well, the system is also the people. The people is the system. So I
I
think
mean, that
government after
infrastructure,
government. So
technology.
government after government has tried to get people to pay their taxes, and government after government has failed. We are
Yes,
ingenuous. We are very enterprising in the way that we are able to beat the system. So I really don't know, what will work. Do we finally take that very draconian way of just taxing consumption? I
yes,
don't know, because really, I mean, every government has tried to get people to pay taxes. Every government has failed.
yes, yes, indeed. Recently, a stringency index created by Oxford University shows how strict a country's measures were and at what stage of the pandemic spread it enforced these. On the scale of 0 to 100, India scored 100, which is the best score. However, we see that this hasn't helped much in flattening the curve. Where do you think we went wrong?
When you have a country of 1.3 billion and you have not one, two, three problems, but you have a million problems,
Yes.
I think it could have been much worse. And the number to check. So any scientist that you talk to, the number that we need to look at is deaths per country per
Right.
cap. Like how many people are actually dying. That
Yes.
proportion in India is very low
Very
because
low.
maybe a mix of immunity or that BCG vaccine. I don't know what it is, or maybe the strain which came to India was not the one that went to say Italy. We know
Yes.
that there are two strains. So whether it's it's a stroke of luck, that the weaker strain came here, plus the fact that our environments are so full of microbes that all of us, we can all eat street food. We're quite okay with it. Our
Mm.
immune systems are far stronger. Why is it that even Indians who live abroad, when they come here, they end up falling sick because their immune systems are so protected? Or we don't know, again, research, we don't know whether the BCG vaccine has something to do. A lot of the deaths we are seeing is because of comorbidities of diabetes, hypertension, heart diseases, and other diseases. But to say that India has not done enough, I would take exception to that. I think both state and central governments across political parties have coordinated, cooperated, and very quickly there have been fairly nimble steps to have been taken. For instance, telemedicine uh, was illegal because of a Bombay High Court order. So very quickly the Supreme Court passed a judgment that it can be allowed, and the government has put out notifications on what the protocol is. So
Yes.
telemedicine is suddenly legal, and this
Yes.
happened end of March.
Yes.
And if you start counting all that has happened, a lot has happened. Is
Yes.
it perfect? No. Is the curve flat? No. But are people dying like flies? No.
No.
We are. Uh, so every state will have a different experience. You'll have states which have done very well, and there are states like Delhi which have done really badly because in the lockdown you were supposed to have actually ramped up your medical facilities, which Delhi and even Mumbai simply did not. But there are other states which did, and their outcomes will be very different.
Yeah.
So then, because you remember, health is a state issue.
Yes.
So you will have differences. I mean, again, look, the way that Kerala has done so well. So you will have different experiences across different states. And I really think that this is one thing that uh, nobody could have, no government has had the answer. So Sweden went one way,
Yes.
but then they said, no, we had a wrong thought about that. We should have locked down. So we
Yes.
endlessly debate who was right, but the answer is that nobody knows.
No.
And everyone has had to react as the situation has changed. So we should have shut our borders in February. Yeah, but all of us, I was still traveling till middle March. We didn't think it was going to come here.
Yes.
So somewhere also that the information coming out of China was not very clear. China plus WHO, that whole story of there's no person-to-person transmission. If somebody like WHO says that, you believe them. So
Yes.
that that entire story of we don't know how serious it is, we don't know whether it's going to come here, and then you start taking steps. So I think we've done very well, and the challenge now really will be because the spikes actually are coming now in June and
Yes.
July.
When you
So
open up. Yes.
we are fully open. I think we are mostly open,
Yes.
and the way that the cases are increasing, we are seeing the pandemic really happen in Delhi. Hospitals are full. There's a shortage of doctors and nurses. So the pandemic is actually hitting us now. But let's see what the number of deaths looks like after 2 or 3 months. But as of today, on that metric, India is still amongst the one of the better countries in the world.
Yes.
And it's probably not because of the government, it's a stroke of luck because of the way that probably our immune systems
Mm.
are trained, which came here. Correct.
Yeah, that's a great analysis, ma'am. How does your book Let's Talk Money help people financially in the time of COVID? Who are the people for whom it is an absolute must read?
Well, as an author, I can tell you it's an absolute must read for everybody, for 300 million middle class Indians, because it's actually been written for a first time investor
Yes.
in India. It is so Let's Talk Money came out of a demand from the people that I would talk to, lecture, television, when they would say that there is nothing to read for an Indian investor. People
Yes.
start talking of very complicated strategies, but we don't even understand asset allocation. So, what I've done in Let's Talk Money is really try to onboard people in a very simple, easy, non threatening manner into managing their own money. And the book doesn't promise to make you rich overnight. That
Yes.
is a false promise. There are snake oil salesmen giving you the dream that you will become rich in a year. They are making money, you are not making money. the book tries to get you financially empowered. It gives you a system for the rest of your life. So it's like open architecture, which says that, well, here is a system, and here is how you will have to modify it according to your age stage, because every family will have to have their own unique financial plan. There is no one size fits all. So the attempt really has been to onboard and to give a financial habit, a financial system which an average person can use. And you asked me how has it been useful. I think the high point of this time has been when people who are readers have reached out and said, because they read the book, they had an emergency fund for 6 months to a year. And
Yeah.
as the pandemic hit, they were prepared. So that for an author that it helped
Yes.
people in time of a disaster has been extremely heartening.
Yes, yes, ma'am. That would be very grateful for the people as well as for the your own consideration. That's great, ma'am. Thank you so much for coming on Ecoholics. At last, I would like to seek some few words of encouragement for Ecoholics.
So you're doing a great job, Sanat. Ecoholics sounds like a great idea. And I think we need more and more de-jargoning of things which sound complicated, look complicated, but may not be. And I have always taken the view that when people use jargon, they're displaying their ignorance, because it's much easier to use that piece of jargon rather than explain it out. So the simpler you make it, the more you have to know, and that is where uh, the financial sector has taken pride in making it complicated. And efforts like yours, go a long way in trying to get the message across to people that it's not that tough. It is easy to understand, and all of us do need to understand the economy. I mean, you will have the need to understand macro and microeconomics in every leadership position, whether it's the judiciary or the IAS or senior doctors. The interlinkages between macro and micro are things which everybody in decision making needs to know. So, good, well done, more power to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. It was a very insightful discussion with you, and all the students must be enlightened with the discussion. And I must suggest all the students and the followers of Ecoholics to read her book, Let's Talk Money, because it's a very important to read the personal finances and how to manage it, because we never studied money finances at the school level. So at the higher education or the personal level education, you need it. Thank you so much, ma'am, once again for a wonderful session, and thank you for accepting the invitation. Okay,
Thank you
hope
so
to
much.
see you soon.
Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah, bye.